Welcome to Let's Talk About the Deep Stuff. I'm your host, Sean Kneese. On this show, we dive deep into the big topics with candid, off-the-cuff conversations. Or monologues like I'm doing now. But a monologue is a conversation with yourself, and I'm having a conversation with you. It's just, you can't really respond in real time to me. You could email me or reach out, Sean K Vibes on Instagram, or Let's Talk About the Deep Stuff on Instagram. But today I want to talk about two ideas that really connect: impermanence and interconnectedness. Whether we realize it or not, everything is connected. Some people resist the idea of impermanence. They don't like the thought that things don't last. Others struggle with feeling like a smaller part of something bigger. But the truth is, there's a comfort in it. Even Earth is just a tiny speck in the universe. We're part of something far larger than we fully grasp, and that connection is always there. Even when we feel isolated, the things we do ripple out into the world. Interconnectedness means nothing ever truly dies, it just changes form. A life ends, but its energy, its actions, its influence becomes a part of something else. That's the real power in impermanence, transformation, not loss. Every small action, every connection matters because nothing vanishes. It just becomes part of the whole. And impermanence gives life more meaning, too. You know, if we had all the time in the world, like there's all this focus on, one day we'll be immortal and all that stuff. And, it wouldn't be bad if we could have longer lifespans and stuff like that. But I think that also the impermanence of life and the idea that we do grow old one day, that it doesn't last forever, also gives it more meaning, I think that's what makes things more valuable, is that it's not forever. And then the fact that it fades, and then then some new things are passed on to the next generation, or there's a beauty in that too. And what I noticed, like a thing I like about some of the Eastern tradition, like Buddhism, for example. I mean, I know there's some sects that have more of a there's some interpretations of Buddhism believe in deities and all that stuff, from what I understand. But I know at least the secular interpretations of Buddhism is more about achieving peace in this life. And while a lot of religions here in the West, I don't want to say the West, because even Christianity originated in the East, so it's not really a Western religion. If you really want to have a Western religion, it would be like Greek mythology, or like following the Greek gods or following the Norse gods. Like that would be a real Western religion. But Christianity is an Eastern religion too, technically. And so is Judaism. But at least one thing in most mainstream religion in the West is kind of people coping with the fear of death, with that after you die, this life goes on. And I feel like Buddhism, at least certain interpretations of it, is being at more at peace with death, learning to overcome the fear of death, and being okay with the fact that this isn't permanent. And when you make peace with that, then you can kind of achieve a heaven on earth, which I think in a lot of ways that's what, for my interpretation, that's what Jesus was talking about more than an actual afterlife. He was talking about creating a heaven on earth. Because, I interpret a lot of those texts as allegories, not like literal fact. I'm not exactly an atheist, but I don't believe in traditional organized religion. I don't believe in God in the traditional kingly sense, as Alan Watts always put it. I do get that there's a comfort in the idea of a better afterlife, especially if you're going through horrific circumstances in this life. Think about slavery, for example. Many enslaved people held on to religious songs and teachings. I'm talking about slavery here in the United States, as it was practiced here in the United States. Many slaves held on to religious songs and teachings because life was unimaginably hard. The idea of a better life after this one gave hope. It's the same for people facing terminal illness or enduring horrific atrocities, and you see it happening right now in places like Gaza, people praying and holding on to faith, holding on to hope, and unimaginable circumstances. And when life offers nothing, clinging to the idea of a better reality beyond this one is deeply human, and I completely understand that. But on the flip side, that same focus on the next life could be used to justify a lot of cruelty. Some people start thinking, well, I don't have to worry about this world. I just need to secure my place in the afterlife. And that can make them ignore real suffering around them. They decide that some people are worthy of compassion and others aren't. Instead of trying to create a kind of heaven here on earth, they focus only on the one that comes after. And that mindset can lead to incredible harm. Wars fought in the name of God, oppression justified by Scripture, indifference to suffering that's right in front of you. It's a distortion of the idea that life has meaning beyond ourselves. Faith, when it becomes a tool to ignore the real world or devalue some lives over others, can turn something that's meant to be uplifting into a weapon. At the same time, it highlights how powerful the human need is to find meaning and hope. That same drive that can motivate incredible cruelty is also the thing that gives people hope in horrible times. It's a double edge. And actually, I know people talk about how sometimes Christianity was used to justify slavery here in the U.S., but it was actually, on the flip side, a lot of the abolitionist movement were inspired by religion because they believed slavery was a sin in the Bible. I know that Harriet Tubman believed God was guiding her, and I know she identified with Moses a lot, because he was the one that frees the slave in the Bibles, and she thought God told her like to help end slavery and everything. Same with John Brown, the famous white abolitionist who was before the Civil War, helped lead slave revolts and everything. And Nat Turner before him, the African American man who was a slave, but he believed God spoke to him to revolt against slavery. So that's an interesting double-edged sword, that like some people thought slavery was perfectly fine in the Bible, and then some people thought it was a sin. Yeah, and Harriet Tubman was called Moses by some people as she was freeing slaves and everything. I think it was about 5 years ago now, at the most. I think it was about that I had this very intense dream that this woman, she seemed malevolent. She had a very strong presence to her, and at the time, like, the dream felt like more than a dream. It was she was telling me, you were just a drop of water. You were just a grain of sand. And it felt very sinister and dark, the way she was saying it. And it was scary. But looking back on it, I think it wasn't as sinister as it seemed. I think it was just a wake-up call from some kind of higher intelligence, or maybe some higher consciousness within me, to remember that I'm part of something bigger. It wasn't just telling me I'm insignificant, I'm going to be forgotten, blah, blah, blah. I think it was telling me to look at my actions that way, that I'm a drop of water, I'm a grain of sand. So my focus should be on what am I giving to the world? What am I giving back to others? And when I think about it, a lot of people, if they focus just on the destination and on fame, recognition, that you never get lasting happiness with that, right? Because the validation could come one day and it could leave the other, and that it'll never fully fulfill you. You look at a lot of these celebrities that have all kinds of substance abuse issues, and they don't seem very happy because maybe a lot of their focus was just on being the big star, or they don't know how to handle the fame. But the ones that seem happy, the ones that work in entertainment or the arts, I'm just using this as an example, are the ones who focus more on the craft, and focus on, they just love the doing of what they do. I feel like I've mentioned Keanu Reeves many other times in this episode. I've mentioned Keanu Reeves many times, like multiple times on this podcast when I brought up this point, but like he I feel like he just focuses on his craft. He's not caught up in the whole celebrity culture and everything. And I think a lot of ways that's why he's happier, or like that's why he seems more fulfilled than a lot of other actors and stuff you see that end up having. Or there's other ones that just focus on the craft and the role and the journey, and then the ones that they end up being very generous with like their money and everything like that, but they don't make a big display of it. It's not to be like, look at me, look at how generous I am. I think that's just two things. Like, focusing on what you can give becomes more rewarding than what you can get, or what validation you can get. Like, what can you give back to others? And focusing on the journey, not the destination. Because if you're always focused on the journey, there's always new things you can learn. There's always new adventures to await. Like if your goal is just the destination of one day, then once you reach that, then what? I think that's how you have long-lasting meaning. So, impermanence and interconnectedness show up in everyday life. It's about everything we do, every choice we make, every interaction we have feeds into something bigger. The small, ordinary moments, the conversations we have, the kindness we show, the energy we put out, those all ripple outward. You might never see the effects, but they exist. On the flip side, it also means our mistakes, our cruelty, our neglect ripple outward too. Nothing happens in isolation. Every negative action, every act of indifference becomes part of the larger pattern of the world. That's the weight and power of interconnectedness. It's neutral. It just is, and it reflects what we put into it. So in a way, impermanence and interconnectedness are both liberating and sobering. They remind us that life is always moving, always shifting, and nothing is ever truly lost or wasted, but they also remind us that our actions, good or bad, matter in ways we can't always predict. And it's the same as I was talking about when it comes to success. You can achieve incredible things, reach heights most people only dream of, but a lot of people use that success as a way to feel superior or to separate themselves from everyone else. They lose sight of interconnectedness. They forget that their achievements are never truly isolated. They were built on the work, support, and contributions of others, and they affect others in return. I think true success isn't about looking down on people. It's about lifting others up, sharing what you learned and what you built, what you've achieved. The measure of success should be how much positive impact you create, how much you contribute to the world and the people around you, not how far above them you feel. That's the power of understanding interconnectedness. It keeps success grounded, meaningful, and human. But impermanence reminds us that even success doesn't last forever. The titles, the money, the recognition, they're all temporary. Nothing stays the same. And that's not a reason to fear it, it's a reason to use it wisely. If you reach a high point in life, understanding that it's impermanent should make you generous, more grounded, and more aware of ripple effects of your actions. When you combine success with interconnectedness, it changes the game. You don't just build for yourself, you build for others. You lift others up. You create something that outlives the fleeting moment of personal achievement. Success becomes a tool, not a trophy, an opportunity to contribute to the whole, rather than a reason to elevate yourself above everyone else. That's where impermanence and interconnectedness intersect. They remind us that nothing truly belongs to us alone, and that the value of what we accomplish is measured by the impact it has beyond ourselves. And getting back to an earlier point on how, impermanence can make things more meaningful. It can, because I think if everything was permanent, you'd take things for granted. And sometimes when we forget our own impermanence, we take things for granted. But the fact that there's the pain of losing something or losing someone, or even, if it's a relationship ending or something like that, it doesn't have to be, a tragedy or death or anything like that even. The fact that it gives you pain that you lost it kind of shows how it was meaningful. So there's a pain to it, but there's also a beauty to how meaningful that was to you. There's a quote from Khalil Gibran, the famous Lebanese American poet who wrote The Prophet, which is one of my favorite spiritual works of literature, because it's one of my favorites in that genre of spiritual writings. I'm going to read this excerpt he wrote on joy and sorrow. I've read it on the podcast in an earlier episode, I believe, but okay, here's what he said about joy and sorrow. He said, "Your joy is your sorrow unmasked, and that same well from which your laughter rises was oftentimes filled with your tears. And how else can it be? The deeper that sorrow carves into your being, the more joy you can contain. Is not the cup that holds your wine the very cup that was burned in the potter's oven? Is not the lute that soothes your spirit the very wood that was hollowed with knives? When you are joyous, look deep into your heart, and you shall find that it is only that which has given you sorrow that is giving you joy. When you are sorrowful, look again in your heart, and you shall see that in your truth you are weeping for that which has been your delight. Some of you say joy is greater than sorrow. Others say, nay, sorrow is the greater. But I say unto you, they are inseparable. Together they come, and when one sits alone with you at your board, remember that the other is asleep upon your bed. Verily, you are suspended like scales between your sorrow and your joy. Only when you are empty are you at standstill and balanced. When the treasure keeper lifts you to weigh his gold and his silver, needs must your joy or your sorrow rise or fall." And that's the thing. Like he says, what gives us joy can also give us sorrow when it's gone. Losing something we love or seeing a moment end can hurt, but that pain doesn't diminish the value of what we had. It actually amplifies it. It reminds us how precious that joy was in the first place. That's the beauty of impermanence. It gives meaning to the things we experience. If everything lasted forever, if nothing ever changed, we might never fully notice the depth of what we have in the moment. It's the fleeting nature of life, of relationships, of success, of experiences, that makes them powerful, that makes them worth treasuring. Impermanence keeps us present. It helps us not take things for granted. It teaches us to savor the highs, respect the lows, and recognize that every moment, every connection, every achievement is part of a larger, ever-changing flow. And when we understand that, joy and sorrow aren't opposites. They're intertwined, each giving the other meaning. I think a lot of our culture, this focus on individualism, makes us lose sight of the importance of everybody, pretty much. Like the roles that people play. Like, that's why I get annoyed. I look at some self-help stuff sometimes myself as a way to apply it to like my own life and my goals and become more the person I want to be and create more of the life I want. But like sometimes these self-help people irritate me, like the way they give simplistic views of like history and stuff. Like for example, Tony Robbins, I remember him talking about like the civil rights. He was talking about, how like one person can change the world. They can ask they like just do one action. Like, and he talks about Rosa Parks or Martin Luther King being these individuals that changed the world. But it's like, it wasn't just one or two people that were in the civil rights movement. I mean, Rosa Parks was one of many activists who refused to move from her seat on a bus. That she was actually a part of a group. She was a part of the Montgomery bus boycott. Was a 13-month massive protest involving 17,000 African-American residents, and the boycott led to a Supreme Court ruling that declared bus segregation unconstitutional. But the simplistic view of history is that it was just Rosa Parks, who was an amazing human being that did something amazing, but she was just one of many that doing all those people together are what changed the world. All those people together. It wasn't just one or two people. It's not, just because we remember one person. That's why I also get pissed off when I hear these, racist assholes saying things like, well, what about like most of the important discoveries is Europeans, most of the important art is Europeans, because that's the only fucking ones you choose to remember, man. It's like if you actually look back at history, you'll see that, for example, Islamic cultures had a lot of scientific discoveries and academic discoveries during a time when Europe was in the Middle Ages. If you look, like you'll see art. If you look for it, there's like incredible artists or musicians or creators from Latino communities or indigenous communities or whatever. Like it's just you're choosing not to look at it. And the African American who invented important things in U.S. history. Most heard of Booker T. Washington, but there was also the guy who developed the traffic light that was African American. There was also the guy who developed the almanac. The first almanac was African American. And the home security system, Marie Van Brittan Brown. It's because the society was racist and overlooked them. And even the ones that are remembered, like blues, jazz, like minorities have contributed a lot to music. And like rock and roll was originally, like a lot of it was like Chuck Berry, and so it's just stupid. And a lot of the indigenous societies like the Mayans and the Aztecs, that had advanced architecture, for example, and five tribes, the Iroquois, is a lot of what inspired the U.S. Constitution. Like the Mayans developed sophisticated mathematics, including the concept of zero positional notation and an accurate calendar system. And the Incan civilization used quipo, a system of knotted strings to record numerical information and keep track of resources. And African civilizations such as the Yoruba and ancient Egyptians developed early counting systems, geometry, and practical arithmetic. And Native American tribes also had counting systems and ways to represent quantities using symbols, wampum beads, or notched sticks. And then, they say things like, to make us sound more civilized, that, oh, well, they did human sacrifice. Well, it's like, so did the Vikings. And also, England burned women at the stake for the Salem witch trials, and the Romans, who were looked at like as the pinnacle of civilization, they had death matches and they had slaves. So it's like, if you're gonna like, no civilization's perfect, but like if you're gonna point to things to make them look inferior, I could point to things in European culture too. So it's like, we've all contributed, all peoples, all groups. Like, it doesn't need to be this, like, we're superior. I'm not saying this to put down Europeans. I'm just saying it, like, no group is superior to others, it's, and just because you have a selective view of history and you think these other people who are forgotten, and just because they're not written, someone's not written about in a history book, doesn't mean they're not as significant, I mean, people who are, even artists that are remembered, they were inspired by people around them that they knew that may be forgotten to history, Or I just thought of Dante with Beatrice. She was a 24-year-old aristocratic girl who died young. It was tragic, but like, she inspired his poetry because of what he felt for her. So like, and now that, like, 800 years later, people, like, his work still inspires other works of art and everything. And another thing is, I was just thinking, in the West, we act like advancement means more wealth, more, industrialization, more this, more that. And, a lot of colonialists looked at it as, like, we're superior because we, look, these tribal people are still living out here in nature. And they use that as evidence that they were smarter or more capable. It was it was just a difference of values. Like, these indigenous cultures, it wasn't that they weren't intelligent. It was that they had a different value system, that they didn't give a fuck about succeeding in a capitalistic way. They didn't give a fuck about a lot of the things we care about. It was simplicity, being in touch with nature, being, the community, caring for others. Just, I saw this quote that said, Western cultures believe we must be alive for a purpose, to work, to make money. Some indigenous cultures believe we're alive just as nature is alive, to be here, to be beautiful and strange. We don't need to achieve anything to be valid in our humaneness. And, just the idea that the best and brightest get ahead, like, not everybody wants to be rich. Not everybody wants to be a billionaire. That doesn't mean they're not intelligent. That doesn't mean they're not ambitious. They might have other things they want to do. They might want to they might have a more selfless mission in life. It's just our society. I think I'm not like totally putting down Western society or America or any of that. I'm just saying like how sometimes I think the way that we're conditioned to see the world here in the West, it's like it contributes to this idea that we're insignificant, we're small, or that others are insignificant because they didn't leave some big mark, or only certain individuals are more important. And I think that there's good and bad parts to that, but it just makes us lack empathy, I think, sometimes. So when you look at Taoism, impermanence and interconnectedness are central to understanding the world. Taoism teaches that everything flows, everything changes, and nothing exists in isolation. Rivers move, seasons shift, life cycles through birth, growth, decay, and rebirth. Taoist philosophy emphasizes aligning yourself with the Tao, the underlying flow of the universe, rather than resisting it. That doesn't mean you're passive or detached. It means you're aware that forcing things against their natural course often causes suffering. And that doesn't mean you couldn't have goals or set intentions in life, but everything has its time, its place, and its purpose, even what feels chaotic or random. Interconnectedness comes from the idea that you aren't separate from the world, you're part of it. Your actions, your presence, even your silence ripple outward, influencing and being influenced by everything else. It's not just a spiritual concept, it's a way of seeing life that encourages awareness, humility, and harmony. Buddhism takes this concept and sharpens it, with its teachings on impermanence, or anicca. In Buddhism, nothing is permanent. Not your body, not your thoughts, not your relationships, not even your sense of self. Clinging to these things causes suffering, because change is inevitable. And actually that made me think, even in the Bible, the book of, the book of Job, where he says, thou shalt giveth and thou shalt taketh away. I know I'm like a literal interpretation that's God just being cruel and taking away like his family and everything, and saying, oh, he'll still have faith in me. But I think that on a deeper level, I think it was kind of the same message I'm talking about here in Buddhism, how change is inevitable and how nothing lasts forever. And at least that, to me, is what thou shalt giveth and thou shalt taketh away. I think that that's, on a deeper level, that's what that means. And clinging to these things causes suffering because change is inevitable. But here's the flip side. Impermanence gives life its meaning. Joy feels richer, love feels deeper, and moments feel precious precisely because they're fleeting. Buddhism also emphasizes interconnectedness through the concept of pratya atsamuppada, or dependent origination. Everything arises in relation to everything else. You aren't just an isolated I. You exist because of the countless conditions, actions, and beings that came before you. And your actions create conditions for what comes after. It's a perspective that encourages compassion, mindfulness, and responsibility, not just to yourself, but to the world around you. Hinduism offers another layer of understanding, particularly through texts like the Bhagavad Gita. In it, Krishna tells Arjuna, there has never been a time when you and I did not exist, and there will never be a time when we cease to exist. Taken literally, this speaks to reincarnation, the soul's journey through multiple lifetimes, but even if you don't interpret it that way, the line still carries weight. It can be understood as a reminder that life is continuous, that nothing truly disappears. Our actions, our energy, our influence, they all transform and persist in different forms. A tree dies, but it nourishes the soil. A conversation ends, but it changes the people involved. A life ends, but the ripples of that life continue in the world. It's a profoundly interconnected view. Nothing exists in isolation, and everything you do is part of an ongoing flow that transcends the boundaries of your immediate perception. Across all these traditions, Taoism, Buddhism, and Hinduism, the lessons overlap. Impermanence isn't something to fear. It's what gives life its vibrancy and urgency. Interconnectedness isn't abstract. It's practical, observable, and ethical. Your actions matter in ways you can't always see, and your presence contributes to a much larger whole. Recognizing this can change how you live. It teaches you humility, awareness, and responsibility. It encourages you to appreciate moments deeply, to treat people in the world with care, and to see that nothing ever is truly lost. Everything just transforms and returns in new ways. So, looking at everything we talked about today, a clear pattern emerges. Life is impermanent. Nothing lasts forever. Our joys, our successes, our relationships, and even our sense of self. The fleeting nature of moments makes them precious. The fleeting nature of life makes our actions matter even more. Everything is interconnected. Nothing exists in isolation. Our choices, our energy, our presence affect the world in ways we often don't see. That's true in society, in history, in relationships, in work, and how we treat others. True success isn't measured by climbing a ladder or personal gain. It's measured by connection, by contribution, and by how you lift others up along the way. Joy and sorrow, success and failure, beginnings and endings, they aren't opposites. They're intertwined. Part of a larger rhythm that connects everything. Impermanence and interconnectedness teach us not to take things for granted, to live intentionally, to lift others up, and to recognize that life, in all its beauty and complexity, is a precious, interconnected flow that continues far beyond any single moment, person, or achievement. So as you move through life, pay attention to the ripples you create, and remember that everything matters. The awareness transforms life from something we merely endure to something we fully experience, fully contribute to, and fully respect. So before I close out, I want to read a poem from Rumi called The Guest House that I think reflects everything we talked about. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. So I'll just leave it at that. I'll let you take from that what you will. That's a famous poem of his, but hopefully you've gotten something out of this monologue I went on. I know I went off on some tangents, but that's what happens with the show when you go off the cuff and just speak. I'd like to know your thoughts. What are your thoughts on impermanence and everything I talked about here, and interconnectedness? What is what helps you feel more interconnected in your daily life? What has been your experience with that? Feel free to reach out on Instagram. I'm Sean K Vibes, or Let's Talk About the Deep Stuff. Also Facebook, Let's Talk About the Deep Stuff. And if you want to keep updated with future episodes, I'm on Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you get your podcasts. And that's about it for this episode. We'll catch you on the next one.